Today's hearing is entitled Helping Homeowners Harmed by Foreclosures, Ensuring Accountability and Transparency in Foreclosure Reviews. This topic is extremely important to our nation's homeowners, especially those who have been harmed by illegal foreclosure practices. It is of particular concern to the countless New Jersey homeowners who have been contacted by my office. Or who have contacted my office, I should say, almost all with terrible stories about their experiences going through foreclosure, and many with stories of being either mistreated or neglected by their mortgage servicers. As we attempt to correct for past illegal foreclosures, we must have transparency, consistency, and accountability in the foreclosure review program. If we do not remain committed to transparency, consistency, and accountability, the foreclosure reviews will be toothless. After being hit hard by the foreclosure crisis and other economic woes, American homeowners expect and deserve a fair review and compensation where appropriate. The success of the foreclosure review program is one of the factors in the recovery of our nation's housing market. Transparency, consistency, and accountability in the foreclosure reviews are necessary for the public and policymakers to know that they are being performed fairly. Transparency will ensure that borrowers and the public know who is eligible for relief, what type of relief will be provided, and the results on a bank-by-bank basis. The public needs full and clear guidelines on what constitutes financial harm to a borrower, so that people who are actually harmed do not fall through the cracks. There must also be better guidance from homeowners who are facing imminent foreclosure as to whether their foreclosures will be temporarily halted or not. And finally, it is imperative that homeowners, advocates, and counselors have a regular seat at the table and give their input on the process. Many of the counselors have been working with consumers a long time on these issues, and their input is invaluable. Consistency is critical so that similarly situated borrowers with different servicers and different reviewers receive similar treatment and outcomes. There must be established protocols in place for both the foreclosure reviews and compensation process to ensure that similarly situated borrowers are treated fairly. Also, outreach and materials must be available for people who speak different languages so that they do not miss out on participating in this program. Accountability will give the public confidence that our bank regulators, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, are fairly and effectively working to protect borrowers' rights and fix harms caused by the banks they regulate. Although the Federal Reserve did not appear today because of the Federal Open Market Committee meeting, they have submitted a statement for the record and will take questions for the record from all senators. I would note that the Federal Reserve has lagged the OCC in that they have not released their engagement letters yet, and I would urge them as the chairman of the subcommittee to move along quickly with that. In terms of accountability, it's also important that the third-party consultants who are making these critical decisions are held accountable for doing these reviews independently of the banks that hired them with the OCC's approval, which is a challenge considering that most of them have done business in some form with the same banks whose work they are now expected to evaluate. It's also important that banks be held accountable for their results on a bank-by-bank basis with appropriate penalties such as fines. And there must be clear standards on how the OCC and the Fed will conduct oversight over the consultant activities and the actions regulators will take against consultants and servicers if it finds their performance lacking. Moreover, there must be a measurable goal and benchmark for the program so that all parties are publicly accountable. In closing, let me just say the foreclosure review program could potentially impact about 4.6 million homeowners who are eligible for review. We must begin to fix those unscrupulous lending practices that took place and wrongful foreclosures with the public interest as our core principle. Mr. Alt, who's your client here?
We work at the direction of the OCC, sir.
So who do you consider your client?
I consider my client the OCC.
Okay. And who's your fiduciary responsibility to?
We take our direction from the OCC. We're fully transparent to the OCC. That is to whom we owe our duty.
Okay.
We are, in effect, an extension of the agency.
And who pays you?
Our clients, the servicers pay us, sir.
When the servicers came to you, what did they ask you to do? When they were considering you as the entity to represent them, what did they ask you?
They had questions about our expertise. They had questions about our capacity, about whether this was an assignment we were willing to take on. We had discussions about that. It was a fairly standard interview process.
Mrs. Kenyon, who's your client?
Our contractual arrangement is with J.P. Morgan Chase. We work at the direction of the OCC.
So you consider your client J.P. Morgan?
We consider that we are responsible to all of the stakeholders in this process, but our contractual arrangement is with J.P. Morgan Chase.
Who's your fiduciary responsibility to?
I'm sorry? Son?
Who is your fiduciary responsibility to?
Our fiduciary responsibility is to the OCC and the borrowers, as well as all of the investors in the capital markets.
So when your client, or yes, you said it as your client. When your client, J.P. Morgan Chase, came to you and they could have chosen anybody, what did they ask you in terms of their interest in your representation?
When they approached us, they asked us if we were interested in doing the work, if we felt that we had the expertise in doing the work, if we had the resources to do the work, and that was the extent of the conversation.
Did any, to either you or Mr. Alt, when they came to you, did they suggest that they would love to try to limit the universe of their exposure?
No, sir.
You need to give me a verbal response for the record, so.
Mr. Chairman, there was no suggestion of that.
Mr. Chairman, the bank is very mindful of the limitations and the representations in our redacted engagement letter and has behaved accordingly.
Let me ask you, Mr. Holland, homeowner advocates have raised concerns about the complaint form being sent to millions of borrowers looking unofficial. Some suggest it looks like a scam. There's no logo. There's dense language that many won't understand. I personally went to the website, which looks very unofficial to me as well. You state in your testimony that the servicers played a role in both developing and even approving the complaint form and website, which raises concerns about whether they were poorly designed with the intention of not having as many homeowners respond to the mailings and appealing. Why were servicers involved in developing these forms to begin with?
Again, our position in this program is that of a neutral, which is consistent with most of the work that we do. I look at the key stakeholders as the independent consultants, the OCC, Federal Reserve Board, and the servicers, and the engagement, I guess, if you will, by the parties was such that they collaborated and instructed us, what to do. We were given essentially the format of the forms that were supposed to be printed and mailed.
So you in essence just played the role of a processor.
Third-party vendor, processor, yes.
So in essence, you delivered the forms as the servicers presented them to you?
Yes, that is
So the
correct.
servicers are the ones who constructed these forms, which makes me concerned about whether or not the interest was to make it as clear and as useful as possible to achieve the goal of informing significantly and in a way that would be helpful to those who might have been injured, that there is a potential relief here versus doing it in such a way that would limit that. Mr. Leonard, let me ask you, you represent the trade organization here. How is it that, don't you think it's a little bit conflicting for the servicers to have devised what it is that they were going to send out to everybody who potentially could have a claim against them?
Mr. Chairman, as you know, the independent review process is part of consent agreements that these 14 individual companies signed with their regulator. So the entire process was developed with the oversight of the OCC and the Federal Reserve. So the servicers are not directing the process, but they are part of the process.
Well, but if they devised the form, and that's the form that was sent, wouldn't you say they were pretty much in control of that?
No, because the OCC, the Fed, the independent reviewers, it was a collaborative process, but the servicers did not make the final determination.
Did the services submit those forms for approval to the OCC, to your knowledge?
I'd have to go back and get an answer on what the exact step-by-step process was, but the entire process was overseen by the regulator.
Are you, either one of you, Ms. Kenyon, Mr. Alt, have knowledge about whether or not the services
The form
received-
in several drafts was submitted to the OCC and the Federal Reserve, and the final form reflects considerable input from both agencies.
Okay. So to the extent then that we have a problem with the nature of the information to the public, you would say to me that it goes back to the OCC?
I would say that at the end of the day, the agencies are responsible for approving the form, and the form reflects their approval.
Now, can both, Ms. Kenyon, can you and you, Mr. Alt, tell me unequivocally that your companies are in no way, shape, or form in any way affected by the fact that you have or may have additional work unrelated to this particular contract with the entities that you are ultimately doing the independent consultancy for, then that does not affect your people's judgment in any way?
Mr. Chairman, speaking for my company, we feel very strongly that we are independent, and we are trying, and we believe we're succeeding in conducting ourselves with a high standard of independence. Indeed, we feel that our entire business model depends heavily on our ability to conduct ourselves independently, not only in this engagement, but in very many of our engagements.
And you have no concern that should you, in a vigorous pursuit of this, according to what you believe the OCC's mandate is to you, that Bank of America, PNC, or Wells Fargo might not hire your firm in the future?
Mr. Chairman, our business model is focused very much on helping financial institutions understand and resolve regulatory issues. And we are successful with that business model in part because of the credibility we enjoy among regulators around the world. And we have that credibility in part because of the independence that we maintain and our track record of being willing to prescribe strong medicine when it's needed. If we were to fall short of that standard in this engagement, it would be fundamentally detrimental to our long-term success.
Ms. Kenyon, I have the same set of questions for you.
Yes, sir. When we attended a meeting in May with the interagency regulators, it became very apparent to us that independence was very, very critical. We've agreed with the bank that, in fact, we would not accept any further engagements within the home lending area. The process that we've set up to ensure that is if any proposal comes to Deloitte, the partner that is responsible for the overall relationship for JPMorgan Chase is notified. He also notifies me, and we have in fact turned down engagements that have come through so that we do not
In the home lending field?
in home lending.
No, but that doesn't preclude Deloitte from taking other opportunities from J.P. Morgan having nothing to do with the home lending field.
If there is any doubt on the propriety of us accepting any engagement, we clear that with the bank.
And you're not concerned that your vigorous pursuit of what the OCC's mandate here may cause them not to have the favor of J.P. Morgan in the future as it relates to other non-home ownership issues?
We are very, very mindful of our mandate to maintain independence in this review, and any type of other engagement that we would take would have nothing to do with this engagement or with the matters under the subject area.
Senator Merkley.